things that are very frequent, such as the verb to go. And that is like one of the many verbs, and they're not even phonologically, this is the verb to want, they're not even phonologically very similar, but they share morphophonology in that they use one stem in the first through third singular, and then the plural, and then the first and second plural share another stem, and that's unified between the indicative and subjunctive. Okay. Carstairs McCarthy, who was a classical morphologist, now kind of old, but I do advise you to read him because he has good things to say. Explains analogy by saying that the inflectional resources of a given word must be organized into as few paradigms as mathematically possible. This is based on the assumption that we don't remember paradigms, we remember principles in organizing paradigms. So we don't want to remember too many principles. This is why we have analogical leveling. That's Carstairs McCarthy, and this is his formulation from the 80s, which is still something that a lot of people believe in. Now, another way to make things more economical in a paradigm is to neutralize distinctions. Okay. So I've given you two examples here. In Latin, the distinction between the dative and the ablative is present in the singular, but neutralized in the plural. Again, another example, but that's like very pervasive. In Latin nouns, you will have distinction between dative and ablative in singular, neutralization in plural. And this, in morphological terms, is described as syncretism. Now, syncretism is this. You have one and the same form, similar forms, the same form for two different categories. Okay? Plural and dative, plural and ablative are one and the same form. They're expressed by one and the same form. Now this is very important to take from the class. I mean, this is a basic conceptual notion that you need to distinguish from cumulation. We talked about cumulation when we talked about derivation and inflection. What is cumulation? It's not an exam, but I can, if I'm certain that you know that, I can ask this on your exam, okay? And it's one of the things I want you to understand from this class. When you walk out and you later on read in the literature, syncretism, cumulation, what is one, what is the other? Okay. Cumulation is when you have more than one sense in the same affix. Okay? So, let's say the Turkish passive is a cumulative expression because it may be both passive or reflexive.
Yıkanmak gibi. Edilgen de olabilir, dönüşlü de olabilir. Araba yıkandı, ben yıkandım.
Okay. Syncretism is about putting several categories into one and the same form, not necessarily the same affix. So syncretism is about forms, while cumulation is about the polysemous senses of affixes. Okay. Let's see if we. I haven't given examples of, but yeah, I mean we have the Turkish causative didn't have like any other meanings, okay, but the passive does. Okay, so this is the main difference. So when somebody says syncretism to you, like you have to flash forms that incorporate several categories. Okay. Plural and dative and ablative. That's a syncretic form. You can't tell. You need the context to tell, is it the dative or is it the ablative, right? In many Slavic languages, the accusative and the genitive go together in the singular, so that distinction is lost. Those are syncretic forms. But the accusative suffix and the dative suffix mean just dative and accusative when used. Okay, so they're not cumulative. So that's one major difference, and please remember it. Go read up again. Here I have exemplified syncretism. Okay.
What can we speak? Can we talk about syncretism when homonymy comes from different paradigms of a lexeme? Possessive and case, for instance. In Turkish, it can be an accusative and.
So why are they different paradigms?
An accusative or third singular possessive forms of a noun ending with consonant is.
Well then, yeah, I mean that's a perfect example of syncretism.
But not the nouns, not nouns ending with vowels. Just for class ending with.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's it. This is what syncretism is about. Syncretism is a widespread phenomenon, and it is very often morphophonologically conditioned.
But one form comes from possession, and the other comes from case.
So yeah, I mean
can
it's
still
still it's still two different categories that potentially could have had two distinct expressions, but do not. They use the same expression. That is a perfect example of syncretism.
Mm-hmm. This is just homonymy in inflection.
Yes. Yeah.
But it should be the same lexeme.
Yeah, it has to be the same. This
same
is
lexeme.
Yeah, it has to be meaning. Meaning is not supposed to change. Are you guys following this? What does kind of mean?
Evi diyoruz. Hem onun evi oluyor hem de evi seviyorum derken ki evi mesela.
Okay, now we're following.
Now you do.
Anladınız mı?
Okay. Turkish has cases, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So why are the Latin syncretic cases difficult? You've never seen Latin. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I mean, this is why I'm here. So we'll see some. Okay. But yeah, homonymy and inflection. Then out of this view on paradigms being lists and organized into cells, comes the idea that some paradigms will be defective, which I totally oppose. I think that for all defectiveness there is a semantic, there is like some kind of functional motivation. And for some things the functional motivation is obvious. For others it is less so, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So, but anyway, in the literature you will find the notion of defective paradigm. A defective paradigm is such where there is an apparent lack of something. So the nice American verb hang out, I love it. I love to hang out. It doesn't have a past tense. You can only use it in the progressive. So it's a perfect example of something being defective in this sense. We are hanging out at Beverly's right now. Somebody calls on the phone and like they ask, what are you doing? We're hanging out. You can say we were hanging out at Beverly's last night, and that's all we did. But you cannot say we hung out. That's like, forget it, and people will laugh at you and tell you this is not how you hang out. But you know, the whole thing, I mean, you cannot, it is progressive in meaning. Its actions art is progressive. It is something that you extend over a period of time. You're engaged in a relaxed activity of doing nothing. Okay, so there is no way you can combine this with the semantics of past tense, which is why this verb does not have a past tense. And a lot of defective things you will see like something like that. Okay. Then there are the things that are described as without apparent semantic justification. So what you can see here, now you should. It's not very often used, but still alive, form was in English. That means sad. And it's Shakespeare uses it a lot. But so it's early modern English. You still see it here and there. Educated native speakers of English will know it. Less educated will not. But it's a register thing. So this is a quote. This is where it has a funny syntax. It has to precede its subject always, and it comes after reported speech. So it's a reportative particle, verb, whatever you want to call it. It has to appear with the subject. So it's this random verb form doesn't have anything. So it's a good example of a defective paradigm. Well, it has a cognate in Gothic. I've talked about Gothic before, right? Gothic is the first written Germanic language. So now in English we describe quoth as something of the past. But in Gothic texts we find exactly the same thing. So quoth in the Gospels, which are the richest Gothic literature that we have like a few letters in the diary. But this is there to introduce that somebody said something. Okay? Now in Gothic we can't like talk about Gothic being like old because and this is something of the past, because this is how the people who wrote in the 4th century, and there was no writing tradition. Okay, so it's a functional thing that we use in speech. We use in explanatory or quotative particles. Now, if you look at like Slavic languages, there is Russian mol. In Russian, there is exactly the same thing, mol. That is a quotative particle. It could be used as an evidential particle. And it goes back to the Old Slavonic verb molviti, which means like say and speak. And now I think you'll know this. The mek in Bulgarian is used wholesale to say that when you speak and you want to explain, okay, this is syncretism. That is to say, so in Bulgarian I would say syncretism, the mek, and then I'll continue with exemplifying syncretism. Okay? It is not, I mean, it's a colloquial register. So I'm not going to use it when I'm giving a lecture, but unless I give the lecture to people I like very much and we're friends. But I can totally use it with my mom and my friends, and this is something that is actively used. So it's again something from a verb to say that form splits and becomes something else. Okay, all of these will go in mainstream linguistics. All of these will go as examples of defective paradigms, and there is no real justification for why these forms exist alone. We know they're verbs, but why do they exist alone? Well, because they have a function on their own, and they're no longer really verbs. They do something in discourse. The discourse markers, they're once upon a time verbs, but their function is different. Okay. But this is what you will see. Like, well, you'll see like defectiveness justified by semantics, like the action sort of hangout, and all of this stuff that does have another functional explanation. And usually it's things that used to belong to a large class, and they have come to a null class, because it is impossible to say, well, in the Germanic things, they need to have a subject, so this justifies like describing them as verbal. But Mol in Russian, Debek in Bulgarian, they have nothing to do with like anything that looks like verbs in these languages. So effectively, they are particles. Okay. In the mainstream literature, you also find that, well, to fill up defectiveness, you borrow forms from another paradigm, or you use periphrastic ways, which I think that there are no, I mean, to borrow forms from another paradigm, that would like lead to suppletive paradigms, but this is not exactly how suppletive paradigms arise. Use periphrastic means, yeah, well, you do, and it doesn't bring you into another paradigm. But those will be the summaries of how you repair defectiveness, because somehow the underlying assumption is that everything has to be able to go into a grid, and it really doesn't. So this is where I'm leading into the TOBB perspective. And before we go into TOBB, I'll go through...
One question.
Yeah.
Must and can, do they have defective paradigms in future conjugations? For future. Can we say that?
If you want to move in, I have to, yeah, you can, if you want to say that models need to have a future. Future is not an inflectional category in English. English does not have a morphological future. So, yeah, you can't, you can't form a future from must. You have to say, I will have to do X and X, and I will be able, maybe. You can't say I will, can.
It's syncretic.
They're defective. In this view, they're defective. But again, they express something else than most action verbs. Like, in English, you have semantic classes of verbs. And on the view that all verbs in English will have to be specified for tense, then we count past or present. Those are the morphological expressions. The future is expressed by periphrastic means anyway.
Syntactically defective, maybe.
Okay, if you want to do that. When you say that something is defective, then the ground assumption that you have assumed is that all things are regular. Okay, this is like some kind of unspoken canon, and language doesn't have a canon. A linguistic description may have one. Your theory may have one. Then in your universe, okay, fine. But in actual use and in a functional view of language, there is no such thing as defectiveness. There are things that will be devoted to some categories for a reason, and things that will evolve from one category into another, also because of usually extra-linguistic reasons, function, frequency, and a whole list of factors that will drive them in one direction or another. So the modal verbs in English bring other things into the discourse, things that are different than action. So on that perspective, you cannot expect them. You cannot expect something like must or can that expresses obligation or ability throughout an meaning. You bring it in and you have decided the mode for the entire utterance. It's completely different from something like run. So you cannot, I at least cannot expect it to behave like a run. I mean, those are two different animals, and they will be different in shape. But this is what I think.